maybe. I'm going to be the moderator of the first session after lunch, which is always a difficult thing because we've just had dessert. But we have this excellent conference on the input-output model in Mexico. Both of these people, if you work with a pioneer, you can't be a pioneer. So only one of them is a pioneer. Arón, Fuentes, and Alejandro Brugués from COLEF and Tijuana, right? I think Alejandro was born in Cuba, but he'll explain this to us later. Very briefly, I will introduce my speakers. Then we have our commentator, who will be Mr. Joaquim, who will speak of a different. I think he will do this in English, but. Dr. Arón Fuentes, aside from all his merits, has an important merit, which is that he's the president of the Mexican Input-Output organization, and we suggest that you are very kind to him because he's very vengeful, and he works at the School of the Northern Border. He has a PhD from Irving. He is a member of the National System of Researchers Level 3. He's written several books and papers. Dr. Brugués, Doctor in Economic Science from the University of Baja California. He's a researcher from the COLEF. He belongs to CONACYT. He has the credentials and the publications, and 40 minutes, and then we'll present the commenters. The presentation will be given by Alejandro. However, we thank Paulo, who has taken leadership in organizing the input-output conference together with the INEGI and the School of Economics. Thank you, Pablo. And the presentation doesn't necessarily refer to a technique. It's more about calling attention to how the volume of academic production of the input-output topic is increasing at the regional level. Well, I also thank the organizers of this event for the invitation. I think what we will present is an attempt to summarize the much that has been done with regards to production of input-output matrices at the regional level in Mexico. As I already said, these input-output matrices in Mexico have a long history in national academic production. First versions we have reference of date back to the 60s, and ever since we've seen a continuous production. They were on many times we saw the dominance of direct information models, and many papers and books were written about this, but there were other phases in which parts of that had to do with indirect surveys or indirect methods in general. But in good measure, we've used a series of methods which are documented in the works of several authors that we should review in this bibliometrical approach that we will do during this presentation. First, we need to make reference to the fact that our work owes to what Walter Eisner did in terms of regional science, and as he said, his work provides a distinction between the national input-output model and three spatial models, the regional, interregional, and multi-regional ones. Therefore, it's part of what inspired us, and we wanted to give tribute to Mr. Eisner. Sometimes technology fails, but in general terms, what will guide this presentation is to present you a few concepts of bibliometric analysis. We'll do a general schematic presentation of regional models for input-output, and then we'll do a bibliometric analysis on the basis of network theory. Finally, we will present certain conclusions which can shed light on the work done on regional input-output in Mexico. In general terms, we follow two definitions of what bibliometrics are. The first one is defined as the application of quantitative analysis in the bibliographic references of a body of literature. And the second is described as an application of mathematical and statistical methods in the study of the use of documents and publication patterns. We try to follow both because we believe that it's not only important to know what has been done, but who has done it and where it has been published. These would be the two most relevant elements in this sense. Bibliometrics can be used for two main fields of reference. The first one has to do with descriptive studies, and the second has to do with evaluation studies. The first one relates to trying to quantify those who have contributed, what countries, what authors, different types of categories of academic production, and the other one has to do with the use of this academic production by other researchers, and this has to do with the analysis of the quotes within these within research. The history of input-output studies is long in Mexico, and within this, we're interested in studying the tendencies and the growth of the regional input-output field in general. And this is a field that has seen a large amount of growth in the last few years, especially influenced by the publication of new matrices, part of the INEGI, and many of these works have been left out of the analysis because they've been presented by postgraduate thesis, and the others are publications for books that then form part of the analysis. So we try to identify these tendencies through the published academic articles in peer-reviewed journals, and we also try to identify the authors of these research articles, and we present the tendencies of these publications, and we make a network analysis in order to summarize all these synthetic indicators. Sorry, to summarize them into indicators. So this input-output model has accelerated the process of economic globalization. It has and it has gained importance in this context. All the presentations have discussed national economy as a unity, but when we analyze the different parts of it, we realize that there are different economic levels, different structures at the sector level, which leads us to understand that this that this idea of a nation is composed by a diversity of states, regions, and sub-national regions. So we see there's an absence of availability of tools for economic analysis, and as you know, the input-output model has several tools to analyze the economy, not only at a general level, but also in terms of its impacts in different areas. So here we need to remember that the INEGI published 5 years ago the matrix that refers to the 2003 data, and it has announced that the input-output matrix will be available in a few weeks before August is over. In this context, what we've done through our work and the creation of the Mexican Association for Input-Output is that the efforts to create subnational input-output models is an area of interest for researchers in Mexico, and it's an area that's seen development in terms of the work done at the postgraduate level, whether it's been through master's or PhD students, and it's a field in which this young talent, the young talent has given very much, and we want to recognize them even if they did not form part of the study. We could, in general terms, dissect a region considering that it's formed by a productive system that has purchasers, sellers, that relate not only to the rest of the countries, but also to the rest of the region, to other regions. So if we if we spoke of data availability, transaction registries at the regional level are non-existent. Therefore, we can't estimate precisely the level of commerce, but there are levels that allow us to understand this. And we also have the action, different patterns of saving and investment. Households are an important category, and what we have at the regional level is an industrial composition that corresponds in a way to the national one. It has characteristics that need to be considered when a regional input-output model is taken into account. With regards to the tradition of generating regional models, well, we want to mention the methods that have to do with surveys. Even though we have these sometimes produce very precise results, they may be very expensive in terms of time and effort and money. Notwithstanding this, there are efforts in Mexico that have followed this line of research. There are other methods which are those we are trying to mention here that have to do with studies that are based on surveys. So these have two different visions. One which has to do with subnational analysis of the economy in isolation and the country, and the other is when you do an analysis of a region in a bi-regional or multi-regional context in which you have interaction between the different regions of the system. The variety of methods is quite wide. We've quotients of Fleck, or for localization, industrial quotients, gravital models, and also supply-demand adjustments. In general terms, these would be the methods that have been in general used. If we check this very simple structure for input-output, well, we have a structure of the economy in which we take into account purchases, and if we see the lines, we can see what the destination of a production is. If we check the columns, we'll see how it's generated, or the production functions that allow us to reach these results. There's two main blocks for analysis. One has to do with intermediate demand, and the other one has to do with final demand. The main difference is that if the flows we are registering continue to form part of the circulation of goods in the economy, or if they form part of a consumption that no longer is part of economic flow. So generally we work with models that are closed, and so these are closed models, and as a result of this, we consider three basic matrices. These would not be the only ones, but the first one has to do with a transaction matrix, which reflects purchase and sale flows in each sector, and can be expressed when you relate this with the production considerations. Another one has to do with Leontief's inverse matrix, which expresses direct and indirect considerations for this sector. So there's another type of matrix, and we have quotient matrices, which are seen in the sense of distribution, etc. In this sense, we've presented the analysis of input-output, and the main difference with the national models is the way in which we interpret the regional commerce quotients, or how a region relates to other regions. So we will make use of network theory to present bibliometric analysis, and this is a technique that is related to the input-output, and this technique has been used to determine key areas, multipliers, etc. In general terms, what network theory attempts to present is the relation between actors that are seen as nodes, or hubs, or points, or links that are related to lines or arcs that may be represented by the presence, if it's a dichotomic matrix, or depending on the magnitude of the relation, if we consider the value of this relation. These matrices can be represented in terms of graphs. Graphs are expressed if there's a relation or not between sectors, the magnitude of this relation, and as a result of this, we can begin to calculate other aggregated indicators as a result of the relation that exists between these sectors of the economy.
Once it is applied, as somebody mentioned earlier, there are several matrices that can be estimated based on the relationship existing between the economic sectors, or in a general way between the agents that are related by these arcs. Three essential concepts. It's an adjacent matrix that has to see whether there is a direct relationship between the actors or between the sectors that are being analyzed. A path matrix that has to do with the possibility of being related, at least indirectly, between one sector and the other, and a connectivity matrix that gives us the amount of relationships that a node has with the rest of the nodes existing within the system. Based on this, you can estimate, among other measures, the degree of centrality that a node has. And this degree of centrality can give us the importance of the node in terms of its linkage with the network as a whole. And that centrality, we can refer to it in terms of key sectors of an economy, because it is more deeply related with the whole or with the rest of the sectors within that economy. With these elements, then, we started to analyzing the production of articles, of academic articles, based on input-output matrices at a regional level. And we reviewed articles available on web pages that were in the indexes that we mentioned here, and that were also included in those databases. We went through an interpretation process based on keywords and based on other mechanisms that left us with the academic production of interest to the analysis. We basically used 3 different softwares in order to carry out all the analysis that we're presenting here. The first one was Stickies, which is a software to carry out bibliometric analyses based on this notion of networks. The other software is Access, to generate a database with the information from the academic articles. And the other is something that is called UCI-Net, which allows us graphic representations of the matrices that we are defining. How am I doing with time? You're halfway through. All right. Good. You still need 20 minutes. Excellent. The results of this structural analysis is what we're presenting here. What we want to underline out of the results of this analysis is that, in the first place, when we carry out the analysis of which are the keywords that are most often used in the academic articles, in Mexico we find 3 large groups. The first group has to do with keywords such as regional input-output models, trade coefficients, and regional multipliers, which is indicating that all these are regional analysis based on national coefficients, i.e. they are using regionalization methods. Another of the groups that we can identify through this analysis are the ones that mention keywords such as cluster, production chains, key sectors, and economic development strategies, that are referring to a group of authors who do input-output work or analysis to obtain analysis or applications of productive systems based on input-output matrices that have to do with trying to influence regional economic policies. And there is a final group that makes reference to structural analysis and the structural decomposition, which is an attempt to make estimates and interpretations based on the technical coefficients obtained in the input-output matrices. Many of these models, these regional models, many of these regional input-output models have been published in national journals. Based on references that we have of studies of this nature in other contexts, other international contexts, what we have noticed is that the main journals that publish articles on input-output internationally are Economic System Research, Review of Economics and Statistics, Journal for Regional Science, and Econometrics. These are the journals that internationally publish more work that is related to input-output studies at a regional level. These journals are not where Mexican researchers usually publish. In terms of Mexican researchers, the journals that are resorted to more often are the ones that, with some effort, you might be able to read on the slide that we're presenting, which are the economic studies, economic analysis journals, essays, the Journal of Economics, Foreign Trade, Northern Border, Mexican Economics, and Development Issues. I've translated the names of these journals. These would be the main journals. And in terms of the analyses, of the network analysis that we're presenting, the more central journeys are New Epoch, Mexican Economy, Issues of Development, Economic Momentum, and Foreign Trade. These are the journals that produce more articles on this topic. In these terms, we can see that there is a delay, a backlag in having our work published in international academic journals, and that might be an important linchpin or axis for our future work. Based on this, we have detected, based on the quotes or the citation in the work, we can detect the interaction between the scholars that devote themselves to input-output in Mexico. And this is done also in terms of this network analysis. What we present here are the main authors mentioned in these academic articles in Mexican journals. Among these authors, the ones that are cited more often is the work that Davila made in a journal that is called Mexican Economics, Economía Mexicana. We have also represented here three different symbols. One has to do with a triangle, that's a blue triangle, that are the works that have to do with regionalization methods that use bi-regional matrices or regional grids. The squares, what they're trying to look at or detect is the structure of the economic structure and the representation in the matrices, and the yellow circles are attempting to analyze the trade flows and the interaction relationships and the overflow relationships between sectors. Within the main conclusions that we reached after carrying out this work is that there is an increasing need of having these kind of tools in our regional economies, and that this might be one of the main stimuli to develop regional input-output models in Mexico. The publication of the matrix has also been one of the important stimuli for the development of works of this nature, and with the announcement that we were made today of publishing a new matrix in a few weeks' time, I am sure that this will be a very important stimulus for the academic production of input-output matrices. The other important issue is that it is still an important goal of some institutions to have tools of this nature in order to carry out input, output, regional input and output analysis, and this wide variety of techniques are really trying to evade the costs, avoid the costs of carrying out input-output matrices based on methods that are survey-based, although the survey-based methods continue to be applied within different studies at a regional level and an interregional level in Mexico. Finally, the regional models, the regional input-output models, although they have a lengthy tradition in our country, they haven't been exploited sufficiently in terms of academic publications. There is still a delay in producing many more articles, academic articles regarding input models or regional input and output, regional input-output models. Although in the last decade we have seen an increase, and we have heard of other studies carried out in academic theses and other publications. So that does provide us with the idea that in the future it is going to be a very important area in expansion for regional studies in Mexico. And finally, what we wanted to underline or note is that based on the shared interest of all the researchers into input-output in Mexico in the year 2012, the Mexican Input-Output Association was created that brings together more than 15 different public and private institutions, research centers, and universities, as well as another 3 institutions or bodies of another nature in this community of interest, which is the Mexican Input-Output Association, that has more than 100 members in this association, and that has already held some gatherings, some meetings, in order to promote studies of this nature in Mexico. Finally, I want to mention that what was presented here is the result of joint work carried out between Dr. Noé Arón Fuentes, Alejandro Uribe, myself, Lilian Albornoz, and Rafael Ortiz Pech. Yes. Rafael Ortiz Pech. These are the collaborators and contributors to the development of this paper that I have just presented to you. I don't know whether you want to mention something. I want to recognize one of the good promises to Lilian Albornoz, but Alejandro already recognized her role of Lilian Albornoz. Thank you. Thank you very much for such an interesting piece of work and this educational presentation, and a very humble, because he skipped graph 5 that mentions the most quoted authors, and some of them are sitting in the room. So all my due respect, I don't know whether this sample was biased or not, but I don't think so. Thank you very much. Great work. Now, based on this clusters structure, we have 2 commentators from 2 other countries which are also football powers, which is Brazil and the Netherlands. So we will hear Dr. Joaquim Guilhoto. I'm going to make a very brief presentation because perhaps some of you didn't hear it. No? So essentially speaking, he's published a little bit of everything. He has a career of 20 years, 200 pieces of work. He's specifically specialist in regional economics, which has to do with the theme that we're talking about right now, the regional input-output model. And now he's a guest or visiting professor at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, where Alejandro was there, and I will later on present our other commenter. Thank you.
As before, I'm going to speak in English. Anyway, it's a nice paper. I really enjoy reading it. I think one of the the things you like to see in a good paper is that sometimes it raises more questions than it answers. And I think this is one of the good points of these papers. So my comments would be in that direction, because I think one thing the paper did an excellent job is to put a picture of the publication of regional input-output models dealing with the Mexican case. But in doing that, you always open for a lot of other questions that you don't deal in the paper. Maybe you can deal with some of the questions. Maybe it's a reason for a second, third, or fourth paper. But that's what my comments are going to be in a sense that not really, because I really like the methodology, the way you did that, but in a sense of other questions that might be nice to have in the paper. So one thing is, on these papers are really, or actually, used in terms of economic policy for the Mexican economy, are actually the papers the result of application of economic policy, or they are just suggestions or inputs for the policymakers to make their policy. So this is a question that might be interesting to be having the information in the paper. Another thing is if you could have some information about the regional input-output models, for which year they are constructed, for which regions, if you have a time series, if the model is freely available for the whole community, if they are restricted to the user. So I know it's a lot of information, but it would help to understand a little bit about the literature. Another questions that you also show, why? Because you show a concentration of the publication in few authors. So why this happen? There is a low interest in the Mexican Academy for input-output analysis, or it's so specialized people don't try even to get rich. You don't teach input-output analysis in the graduate and undergraduate courses. So why it's so concentrated? And another question that's popped out is why you don't publish so much in international journals? It's because people don't want to bother to translate like to English to try to publish in international journals, or it's because the topic of the research is more direct to the Mexican economy, and you think that maybe there will not be interest in international community for this topic. So why you don't publish so much international journals? And this raises another question. You don't publish international journals because of these two things I mentioned earlier about maybe you don't want to write in English, or you focus more inside, or there is a lack of integration of the Mexican Academy with the international community. So that might be one reason, because you are not exposed to the international community, academic community, and then because that you are not have an incentive to publish abroad. So these questions, if you could like put in the paper or deal with that, would be very good to understand a little bit about the situation. And given that, and if you make this first analysis, you might want to answer another question. Given this situation, what can be done so the Mexican papers could be published abroad or more international way? So that's a suggestion. And maybe a second paper is how the situation in Mexico compared to other countries, like, for example, Brazil. We might have in the past this case, I mean, in the Brazilian Academy, usually not only input-output, but in other fields, usually not published a lot abroad. And now they are starting some years ago to make more visible the Brazilian publication. And why that? In the Brazilian case, because we have the Ministry of Education rank the graduate courses in Brazil, and for you to be in a good position, you need to have international publication. So you have an incentive to be published internationally. So somehow you can compare the Mexican case with the Brazilian case. I'm speaking specifically about the Brazilian case because this is the one I know. So, but maybe other countries face the same problem. So, but that's maybe a second or third paper. And another question is, you didn't take in consideration impact factor for the journal. Of course, you mentioned registration in the eBISC, other bases, but you don't mention about the impact factor. And somehow maybe you can try to, if you have the information, to weight by impact factor. And another question is, why only Mexican authors mainly appear that dealing with regional? Why don't you have other authors from other countries working with Mexican IO data? And this, of course, goes back to the previous comment when I made maybe about the low integration with the Mexican Academy, with the International Academy. So I know that's a lot of questions, thoughts, comments, and it's more on a sense of trying to improve the whole set of the paper, because I think it's you have the basic structure, but still needed to put the sweet inside the paper. I mean, it's so. But I really enjoy the paper. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias. Ahora tenemos a nuestro otro comentarista, el profesor Jan, estoy seguro voy a pronunciar muy mal su nombre, Oosterhaven, no sé. Oosterhaven es profesor de Economía Espacial en la Universidad de Groningen, ha sido profesor en otras universidades también, especialista en matrices, bueno, análisis interregional, insumo producto, su tesis fue sobre eso, aplicado al caso holandés. Ha escrito más de 10 libros, 130 artículos y demás, distintos journals muy prestigiados, revistas muy prestigiadas, muchas de ellas en inglés que sí puedo pronunciar, otras en holandés que no quiero volver a destrozar. Y otro punto que quizá va mucho al comentario que dijo nuestro anterior comentarista de cómo se le hace para publicar en revistas internacionales. Quisiera yo nada más remarcar que el profesor Jean es miembro del board editorial de Australasian Journal of Regional Studies, Brazilian Review of Regional Studies, Quartlish Economy, Papers in Regional Science, Economic Systems Research, Tidsschrift, who knows what, Economic System Research, así que teniendo miembros de comentaristas que son de tantas revistas tan prestigiadas internacionalmente, quizás una manera de resolver el problema que había mencionado el profesor Guilhoto. Y por favor, gracias.
Thank you very much for your nice introduction, and apologies for my a little bit late arrival, but I had a very stimulating conversation with a very young colleague that distracted me. So that's my excuse that I was a little bit late.
No problem.
Pablo also thanks, where is he? For the invitation. It's really been very enjoying, except for the first few presentations when my hearing translation didn't work. The batteries were too low. So I missed the official part, but the scientific part, I could follow it all. As far as this paper is concerned, where is... what are my main impressions? Of course, some of the conclusions are very parallel to what Joaquim just said. It's most amazing that we see here a very tightly, internally very well connected inter-Mexican group of researchers. Also, what we see is, and that you forgot to mention, you said there were 3 groups of keywords connected very closely. You didn't mention the 4th one. I would put the 4th one on the first place. I thought in that diagram it was most peculiar that construction items definitely were dominating the citations. Were 4 items all related very much to non-survey estimates of, as I call it, input coefficients. On purpose, I don't call it technical coefficients because there is only half of the coefficient is technical, the other half is a trait coefficient.
That's right.
And it's actually a multiplication of a technical and a trait coefficient, which is why I call it an input coefficient. So people don't think that there's any technology there. And what also struck me is that the applications that were mentioned, all of them were rather standard. Now my first question is that maybe a result of the methodology of the bibliometric analysis that you did? And another question that struck me is, isn't there possibly an impact of what happens in Mexico on the rest of the world? Maybe it's little. Joaquim already indicated. But also there's the interesting reverse question that's not explicitly dealt with. What's the impact of research in the rest of the world on Mexican practice? Now let's see what I selected of that. If you have those 33 articles on which the citations in the end and the author linkage analysis is being based, only 33. That's selected on the basis of keywords, input-output. Why not add social accounting matrices and inter-industry economics, labels like that to it? Because now the only paper on SEM that we have is from Núñez and Mendoza, but SEM is very typically important for developing regions and countries, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are Mexican articles on social accounting matrices. I would include it, and we could get also at the regional level. Not only at the national, but also at the regional level. There must be something, I hope. So that's the question. And then next to having as labels regional and bi-regional, why not also local, urban and inter-regional? Maybe you would have ended up with a much larger set of articles and we would have had a more interesting internal Mexican analysis, and maybe something would have cropped up about the relationships with the rest of the world, both going in and going out. So because now we have only 8 authors, and 1/3 of the articles of our dear friend over here next to me. Now, first, interaction about amazing. There's one article about Mexico that has an input-output label, and it's in English, with no impact back to what happens in Mexico.
There's Fidel there, he can answer.
I know. It was a lonely wolf there in the scheme. My impression, and this is what you might start writing in English about, if you overcome your psychological and other barriers that Joaquim already sort of hinted at. Do comparative research. Get Joaquim in. Do comparisons between Mexican and Brazilian. You have sort of comparable nations, comparable data. See what interesting differences and commonalities come out. And then I saw a label, principal components. I don't know what it means, but it's something that is, I know it from factor analysis, which is a statistical technique. What are you doing is it? Maybe it is very interesting. And then already today we heard a network analysis. You do network analysis here. My impression is that network analysis is a local strength. Now there must be local innovations. Methodologically, you must have found some new result. That's something you could publish on. That's something the rest of the world could maybe learn from. And also you pay a lot of attention that within the Mexican context, having bi-regional input-output tables is relatively new. Well, there are a few around in the world, but what are the results of that? I don't see anything about it, and that may be interesting also. Oh, that's for Mexico out. How about the reverse interaction? Well, that does not follow from the bibliometric study, but from the introduction of the paper and also from your own presentation just now. My conclusion is that it seems, I may be wrong, that you're not aware that there is a bias in all those location quotients and supply-demand pool coefficients, in the sense that either explicitly or implicitly, they assume there is zero cross-holding. I mean, there don't go cars from A to B as well as from B to A. Well, I tell you, there's cross-holding all over the world. I mean, we have different brands of exactly the same product, and we get cross-holding is... Now you have this flag, and you have Charm from Kronenberg. There are two methods, two non-survey methods that use non-zero cross-holding. They're not using it. And then another thing that started me, and that's sort of maybe coming from the same source, what I see is, as far as there is an impact from international literature, it's one-sided. They only look to the north. They don't look to what's happening in Europe. They don't look what's happening in Japan. There's more in the world than North America. So there's a US bias. And those guys in the United States, they're crazy about import coefficients. You too. Now, this new development in Mexico, which I think is very stimulating. I think you should not construct single region input-output tables anymore. There's a new Mexican national table coming up. The minimum you should do is produce a bi-regional table. The region, the rest of Mexico. This is the minimum. Don't do regional tables. Why not? Well, with a national table, each national cell needs to be split up in 4 cells. So you have a control total. You have row controls, you have column controls. And there, Journal of Regional Science, 92, there's a whole methodology to construct bi-regional input-output tables done in the Netherlands. There's some other countries in Europe that do multi-regional and bi-regional, and they are using surveys of export. So if you have a little bit of money to spend, you don't need much. The cheapest scheme is select some 20 or 30 industry experts. Don't go to firms, go to the wholesale representative. They will have an employer union for the metal industry. Go to a guy who really knows the metal industry. Ask one simple question. Your total output, how much do you sell in your own region? How much to the rest of the country? How much to the rest of the world? What we did in the Netherlands, we inserted that in an existing survey and nicely had percentages and had a line, and I said 100% as a total. They're pretty stupid, those guys, all those firms. But if you force them to add up to 100, you get at least a consistent estimate. And we were able, which is interesting, we were able to improve the Dutch regional statistics, which proved to be wrong as far as the foreign exports were concerned. Now, that's expensive, but if you do the same, if you ask the same question to industry experts, you'll have 30 or 40 of them, that's doable, and then you can use the methodology that works on the supply side. Why am I stressing this? Because firms, that's my very strong experience from constructing series of Dutch regional input-output tables, firms are much better informed about where their output goes than where they get their inputs from. Only if you ask a milk factory where the milk comes from, they know it. But if you ask where their pencils come from, they say, store around the corner. Or where the pencils are actually produced, they have no clue. But you can ask a wholesale firm, for instance, even if the firm doesn't know. I sell to wholesale, then the wholesale firms know where the stuff goes to. So this is a much better strategy to do, and then you get, it still has no survey characteristics, but it's a pretty reliable thing. And you don't get this systematic bias that you have with location quotients and supply-demand pool. Is the type of research that seems to be done according to the little information I have of this one paper, I must say. I mean, this is very little information only. I see multipliers, over feedbacks, yes. What I'm missing is structural decomposition analysis. Isn't it done? It's sort of quite easy, but very rich, descriptive statistical tool. It's not a model, it's a descriptive tool. But it is very insightful. Also, I don't see anything, but isn't there something done on I/O tables, regional I/O tables, better regional social accounting matrices that are used as a basis for computable general equilibrium models? Obvious opportunity you have a lot of data. So, and then empirically, what comes out of the studies that you did do? Are they different from what's elsewhere? Well, I don't know. Well, hopefully. Let's wait and see what the results are next time.
Thank you very much to the panelists. It's been a long time since I heard such friendly comments. I think the authors will probably want to respond before I give the floor to the audience. Well, I'll try to answer some of the questions. But when we built this project, what we wanted to deliver the international colleagues was to let them understand that there's a moment at the production of the regional input-output production. Well, we're very well, we're cohesive, but we only publish in Spanish. But these have a high prestige, and what we want is to use the International Association of Input-Output as a Trojan horse for these young people who we would want to give international projection to. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for your comments by Mr. Guilhoto and Oosterhaven. The response to many of these things is not only ours, but general to the community with which those of us who work input-output. Your comments are extremely important to us because an important part of the interest of creating this Mexican Association of Input-Output is the improvement of the internationalization level and academic exchange with researchers of other parts of the world. Many of these problems have been detected, and it's part of what we are going to work on as part of the Mexican Association for Input-Output. Not all of them, but we take note of everything you've mentioned to us to generate a strategy that will allow us to make our work more visible outside of Mexico, and to share methodologies, newer methodologies, also at the regional level, but for national analysis as well. And an important part of what we are attempting through these events is to improve this exchange with the international community on input-output, and your comments will certainly be helpful in advancing knowledge on input-output in Mexico, and we thank you very much for this. Thank you. We'll have questions and answers, 15 minutes. Please let us know your name and the institution you represent. But please, and get in the line because it's so many of you.
You can think of a question at the moment. One comment that that's very confusing. One comment that relates to network theory. You do a lot of that network theory, which must have elements we are interested in the rest of the world. So please write some English articles about it. But one thing struck me, and that's in general in this literature. You have this whole literature about qualitative input-output analysis also. Mm-hmm. It does not apply to your bibliographic analysis, but when you use network analysis in input-output, what strikes me quite often is that You have the quantitative information about the total sales, you have input coefficients, so there's a size element involved. And then what is done is they make a 0-1 matrix out of it. And then all kind of sophisticated analysis are being done on the 0-1 matrix, whereas all the other information about the size of the coefficient or the size of the flow is disregarded. I know little about it, but I know that there is capacitated network theory.
No, but
And that you can apply to the full matrix without, and not making a 0-1 of it.
No,
Yeah,
no.
this is what you do?
yeah.
Great!
No,
Tell us.
not all the application has 0-1 methodology. No todas las aplicaciones son de
Not all methodologies are using 0-1, but there are certain key sectors or multipliers that are using network analysis. Also, the issue of what central can indicate the key aspects of the economy, which can be key to understanding this. The base matrix is Boolean, but the rest is mostly trajectories or paths or distances, which are not Boolean. If there are no other questions, or should I ask? You discussed the issue of publications, right? But also theses that aren't published. I know there's interesting work on this. It's a challenge people in Mexico to actually write the thesis, but actually publishing it would be a huge way of increasing the potential of this work. We don't incorporate them because they're not part of the databases, and we wouldn't have the necessary fields to conduct this together with the rest of the work. For instance, much of this work is in official documents and theses, but they're not part of journals. Theses mostly include the SAM model, social accounting matrices, so it's more these theses in actual published journals. Somebody raised their hand but then lowered it, I think. This is getting difficult. Nobody wants to raise your hand, even if you lower it again. Fidel. I'll speak in a moment. So, well, thank you very much, and we invite you to give us a round of applause.